This is the Gauntlet podcast. My name is Lowell. I'm joined by my co-host, Sherry Stewart. Hello, Sherry.
Hello.
And this is our mid-February game roundup. This time, we're joined by game designer and notable Gauntleteer, Fraser Simons. Hi, Fraser.
Hey, how's it going?
It is going well. You've got a lot of irons in the fire.
Yes, I do.
And you started to pull a few of them out, so we're going to talk about a little bit of that. And I'm excited because we had you on last year, and you've done a bunch of other really interesting things since then. What we're actually going to do, listeners, is we're going to start out by talking about some of the games we played in January and maybe even a little bit into February. And then we're going to talk with Fraser about his projects. And then we're going to end, as always, with Giving Me Life. So, Sherry, we're a little ways into February. How was your January, February? What have you played?
Well, January started out slow because I had decided to take a sort of light month. So I was mostly playing just face-to-face games. Urban Shadows, Trail of Cthulhu, 13th Age. And then, the month got rolling and I got a little bored and I started shoving some things onto my schedule and I ended up playing a whole bunch of things and it was all awesome. So I got to play a couple sessions of Rich Rogers' playtest of Working Stiffs, which is a sort of comedic zombie/office hybrid that's shaping up nicely.
And that's the one he's co-writing with Jesse Ross, who we had on last episode.
Yes. And then I played in another playtest, a sort of homage to Neon Genesis Evangelion. Hilt Blade, that's by Darren Brox. Amazing. Hit all the sweet spots, woo. Yeah. It's like I'm going to have to keep on playing it because he goes, I'm making some more changes. But what he had already was right where I wanted it to be. So I had a great time in that. I played this awesome, sweet-natured little reskin of Woodlands that was sort of a Pokemon rescue teams. And it was so fun and sweet and just darling. That was awesome. And I played the first of 4 sessions of Cryptomancer, which I think was runner-up for my Game of the Year for 2017, and so far, I completely agree with my 2017 self. I was right. It is a good game. And then the one that I'm probably going to end up talking about is Storm Riders, which is a World of Dungeons hack written by Michael Barford that's actually showing up in the Codex Joy 2, which I think will be available on drive-thru sometime in March, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. And just in a month or two.
Yeah. So that was super fun.
So tell us about Storm Riders. What'd you think?
This is literally, the game is cartoons. It is your after-school cartoons that you watched when you're a kid, maybe even your Saturday morning cartoons. It's very much positioned, the artwork and stuff. It reminds me of maybe He-Man and those kinds of fun cartoons. When I played it, we did more of a Care Bear approach to it. And it is a clever, clever little game. Essentially, you're balancing the cartoons. You play a little bit, you visit with the audience of the show, but the GM acts they act like the sort of broadcast standards and practices department. So they're sort of putting obstacles in your way. You can solve the problems, but you have to solve them in a cartoon child appropriate way. And so you have to be upbeat and not too violent and not mean and no blood and you just have to be super creative. And we ended up playing and it was, we giggled and laughed the whole time because it was just cartoon gonzo craziness. And then you would have this pause and you would talk about a audience member that you had created for the game as well, and how they were reacting to what was going on, and how it reflected, for them, the problems that they were having at home. And so you had this sort of craziness, and then it would be grounded in the audience member, and then it would go right back to the craziness. I think the game even it describes itself as it switches between earnest do-goodery, gonzo cartoon logic, and just meta silliness, because when things go wrong or, you use a a partial success, sometimes you have to describe like the merchandise that's being sold on the commercials between there, and you switch to that. And so you're talking about the merchandising that goes with the show. And it was just a silly, fun, but like really well structured game. It wasn't just goofing around. It had a real shape to it. I would say one of the most satisfying one-shots that I've played in a long time.
Now, as a player, how did you find that transition between the state of, playing in the game and playing the meta narrative?
Well, when you make a failure, that's when it cuts to something, right? That is absolutely how TV and how cartoons work. Is there's a failure, something goes wrong, and they switch to a commercial, or the situation gets more fraught. So there was always a thing of you would roll a partial success or a failure and something would switch. It felt natural. So that's how you switched. And it gave you a moment of pause, and whatever happened then just seemed to flow because of that time that things switched.
So Sherry, you mentioned that the game was more Care Bears, and certainly the art looks more Thundar and He-Man and She-Ra. How did it handle a somewhat different aesthetic?
It had no problem with it. The archetypes for the characters, royalty, warriors, riders, sidekicks, mages, those are definitely He-Man, but there are Care Bears that fit into all of those groups too. And we weren't all playing, it wasn't all Care Bears. It was a Care Bear and Snagglepuss's great-granddaughter. So there you go. So it worked. It worked awesomely. Because it's a cartoon. And inherently it just is, you just ravel out things that fit in a cartoon, and there's a place for it. There's a space for it. The moves are very clever for letting you do those things.
Did anyone ever say char, 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 char?
No, but yeah. I did say heavens to Murgatroyd. So no, it was very, I don't know.
And you didn't feel at all. Here's the thing: is we are super old.
We are,
and so even the stuff like He-Man and things like that are the touchstones for this are like for you college years, and for me high school years.
That was what the kids I babysat would watch. But now, mind you, I worked at a TV station. So I was actually like the Saturday morning cartoons were going by and the afternoon cartoons and stuff like that. So the newer stuff like Care Bears and stuff, isn't that horrible? I am that old when I say newer stuff like Care Bears.
And the Snorks and all those newfangled Smurfs.
Yeah, exactly. Go classic, go Smurfs, right? But no, it was easy because the logic of cartoons is pretty much Looney Tunes developed it, and that's the template for everything that follows. And the adventure things like He-Man, that was all, you could go back to Johnny Quest and it's the same stuff, just with less cats and yelling. So,
okay.
Yeah. So it feels universal to me. Now, perhaps not for everyone. They didn't watch as much TV as I did, but...
Fraser, what was your upbringing on cartoons? Because we grew up in the golden age in the 70s of Saturday morning cartoons being big, and then in the 80s they moved to afternoons, and all of that was like a locally broadcast.
It was pretty big here because in Canada we were behind everybody. So we had something called YTV. I don't know if America has that. YTV kind of made that again for kids here. Like they brought that format over and they started doing reruns and like calling for new shows that fit that template. And that's right when the old X-Men show was showing. And that was pretty much all we watched from what I remember is just X-Men. We weren't into like G.I. Joe or any of that other stuff. But you could tell it was Canadian because, for instance, they would play Dragon Ball Z. And then 4 or 5 years later, after that was done, that's when they started airing Dragon Ball. And everyone was like, what happens after Dragon Ball Z, right? Like now he's the little Goku guy and he's like underpowered. And so they go in like weird orders just whenever they can kind of licensed stuff. And similar thing with Sailor Moon, it was like heavily, heavily censored. In Canada, it was like a completely different story, basically. And they erased whole swaths of things, especially, like, no one had an inkling that those girls liked each other in Canada. That's a thing.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that's a U.S. thing, too, as well.
Yeah. I remember being surprised when I read that. I was like, what? I don't remember that.
Yeah. Mississippi mislead?
Yeah.
Fraser, do you have any questions about Storm Riders?
Yeah, the only thing that comes to mind is, was there any interesting advertisements? Did anyone hop in with that?
Oh my gosh. Here's the thing is I was playing with other player who was just as excited about the merchandising parts of their character to begin with. So we started out with that. I think if anything, we probably spent more time on merchandising than any of the other groups that Michael had run for. So we were like, cause I had the little pink cat hair, cat ears and the tail and of course all the action figures. And since she was playing a Care Bear, it was like this little seafoam. Yeah, we had a bunch of stuff. Oh boy, there were tea party sets and everything. So, yeah. But yes, so that was lots of fun for us.
So Nickelodeon needs to hit up these channels and get some ideas.
Exactly.
Yes. Sherry, anything else you want to say about Storm Riders?
You know what? It's coming out in the Codex, Joy 2. It's like 7 pages, and it is a joy to read. If nothing else, at least get it and read it, because it just makes you smile to go through the write-up. It's a perfect little product.
Awesome. So, Fraser, tell us about your January.
Sure. My January was similarly pretty light, as was my December. But I played Dead Planet using Offworlders from Jason Cordova's running that. So, of course, it was quite cool, quite good. Offworld it's like another World of Dungeons hack to make it sci-fi, like Traveler. That went so swimmingly that we are actually playing it even more next month, I think, too, as well.
Awesome.
So that's going to be cool. I managed to play one session of Worlds in Peril X-Men 83, which Kyle was running in the same world as Days of Future Past, the movie, like right after that takes place. So he kind of like erased Apocalypse, which was a bad movie. He's like, that never happened. We're going to take place right after Days of Future Past. And there's lots of like kitschy Easter egg stuff that he throws in there. Like our teacher is Mr. Essex, and everyone was like, oh. And what else did I played Emissary Lost, which is probably what I'll end up talking about here. That is a supplement for Coriolis. And then I used Darren Brock's hack of Forged in the Dark, which I believe he's retrofitting into sort of like a framework in which anyone can sort of apply these games into it, mostly for, I think, licensing reasons. Basically, it's so that we can play Coriolis in Forged in the Dark games, and that went quite well. I played also his Hilt Blade, which is, as Sherry said, it's my jam. It's Evangelion and sad teenagers having feelings, and I'm about it. I also played Girl Underground, which is kickstarting right now. I'm not sure if it'll still be kickstarting when this airs, but if it is, you should go check it out and look at it. And then I played my own games, Hack the Planet, The Veil Inheritance, Uncanny Echo, and Never Knows Best.
Oh, you did a bunch of playtests.
Calm down, Fraser, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'll talk about that hack, if I may.
Absolutely. I'm very, very curious about this, given that you and Sherry and I all played Coriolis last year and loved some bits of it and did not dig others.
I love the game. The system, not so much.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what I was thinking. So I was super happy that Darren came up with a solution, because I've been very busy anyway. And it worked quite well, actually. So what he did was he mapped out the skills to actions, and the character creation process actually mapped pretty well. Like, whatever you do in Coriolis to add skills, you just add action ratings in the skills instead. And it's pretty much the same spread, except you have a better chance because it's blades.
Right.
You get the mid-range success, at least. You can still pray And he also made it interesting where the daily prayers add an extra action rating just for that session. And you have to give some, some fluff, some fiction about what you're doing there. And otherwise, it maps out pretty well. He used MP to be doing like the stress of it. Mm-hmm. And HP is a similar thing, except a physical resistance of it. So it's really interesting because you're still going to have, depending on your archetype for Coriolis, a spread that leans one way or the other towards MP or HP. Like sometimes you'll have 2 MP and 6 or 8 HP or something like that. So you'll have to, within those creative constraints, be resisting physically rather than doing mental type stuff, so it fits your archetype kind of naturally in that way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was pretty fun. The system definitely helped me play the module, which I found to be not great.
So what is the elevator pitch on Emissary Lost within the Coriolis setting?
It is their mega campaign. It's supposed to be 3 books long. This is the first book.
This is only the first book of this thing?
Yes. And within it, there's 2 full kind of like modules with 3 acts each in it. And then I guess there'll be, 2 more of those coming along. And it's supposed to be the sort of like emblematic thing of the game, which is why I ground up against it, because it doesn't have the central conceit that everybody has the ship and they're just doing these jobs and stuff. It starts out right on Coriolis Station. There's a mystery happening. It's called the Mysticides, in which mystics are disappearing, and then what ends up happening is the emissary is lost, literally. Well, more like kidnapped. They're not really lost. You find like blood in their place, so you're probably not like, they probably just took off for a vacation.
Right, that's it. Yeah.
And it's supposed to basically be like a tour guide-y way of showing people Coriolis. Then the second module is down on Qua, I think it's called, the close by planet, and then who knows where the other stuff goes. But there's no like sense of, oh, we randomly got this job and let's go, and then we get entangled in this galactic conspiratorial thing happening, which is weird because it's not what the game is about, You're supposed to be in debt, you're supposed to have the ship, you're supposed to be like desperate for money and doing these things. The first 2 modules doesn't even have you travel out of the system. Like, what if it would make more sense if you were off world and going to Coriolis because of the pilgrimage or something like that, and that's when you discover maybe that they were lost, but it doesn't have that. So it's kind of weird that it doesn't jive with what people are expecting if they had just read the core book, for instance. And the cool things about it, though, was that at least the setting details there are really evocative and cool. Like, it expounds on a lot of stuff that you wish the core book had, but it's still very, I would say, super trad in its modular design. Because, for instance, it's like, okay, here's the starting scene. After that, it really opens up, though, and they can do whatever they want. But really, it's just them triggering like series of chronological scenes at whatever interval they would like. So it's not really open, right? Like, it's not like they could do scene 4 and then scene 2 and then 5 and 6 or whatever, because it all leads up to things that have to happen for the central conceit of this thing to play out and for them to get to the emissary and stuff. So it's still like a railroad. It's just that they have a map with some numbers on it and they can go to different places and certain things trigger when they go there, which I don't think is very open to me. Maybe it's progressive for trad sensibilities, I don't know, but I think they could really check out OSR design and maybe it would blow their mind or something.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the full campaign for Forbidden Lands, but certainly the module that they did for Tales from the Loop, I did not care for, because it didn't seem to match what the game book was promising. It was weirdly off from that.
Is that the Our Friends, the Machines book?
Yeah.
I found that too.
So let me ask you this. Now, I think it was last year. You took the old Cyberpunk 2020 Land of the Free, right?
Yep.
And you ran that. And that's a very old, really classic in the trad mode campaign module. How does that compare in terms of structure, in terms of how you felt as a GM versus this relatively recent campaign module?
It was exactly the same. The formatting is the same. Well, I will say that the new module is good in that it expounds on stuff in a periodic interval so that you'll remember it better. Like it'll be like, here's an outline, here's the actual place where this stuff happens, and then later on here's even more details. But what ended up happening in play was it was really hard to coalesce all of those details from 3 separate locations into what people were doing. So what I ended up doing was just doing Jason Cordova's painting the scene technique. I read each of the details about what was happening there, and then I had people paint the scene about the aesthetic or about whatever they were trying to convey in that particular module's thing that they were doing, and then just had people hit on the theme themselves, and that worked out way better. I read it verbatim the first time, and it was just it was not happening. So it was just okay, next session, paint the scene, and that really fixed it. But yeah, so it's good for retention, but not reference. Okay. But otherwise, it's the exact same as Land of the Free, where it was hey, here's a couple things. They have to hit these scenes. They have to know these things by the end of these scenes. And if they don't, you can't proceed to the next thing because we assume that they know these things. Also, here's a couple extra scene ideas where they could just go do this thing or whatever, right? And then from time to time, there's an open map where they can interact with stuff. So really, yeah, I guess that's a little bit of a call out.
So did they have to succeed to find those things, or was it just that you had to cram it in there somehow, make them trip over it?
Yeah, they pretty much make it so that they have to know these things because then it will lead them to Act 2, which is another location, which is where all those things were pointing them to. You could kind of sprinkle those things in wherever they went, but it was usually placed in where they thought that they should be. There was a missing student's room who has one of those infotainment interface devices or whatever, and he had a journal on it, that kind of stuff. So you could put it other places, but not really. It would be a little weird. Somebody stole his comm device with some credits and stuff, and that was kind of a red herring where people were oh, we can just track his comm device and we'll find him. But instead they found somebody else who lived in the student quarter who was just trying to sell it for money, that kind of thing. And that was, it was neat, but it wasn't whoa, so glad we're playing this right now or whatever. It ended up being a pretty good time just when we started kind of taking it in stride and doing the paint by number scene type question stuff.
Do you think the players came away kind of excited about the Coriolis setting, or more okay, we played that?
I think people were like me and Darren, who are super into this setting, and we're hoping that this would kind of be the golden goose of the game, explaining how the designer would play the game and get the most out of it. But instead it was more a guided tour that you could tell was supposed to take a long time. So yeah, I think people were definitely commenting that this felt like a module, basically. And then I had to adapt to that. So yeah, I think it was mixed feelings all in all, but I don't think anybody was there being oh no, what have I done?
I've made a terrible
Signing
mistake.
up for this game. It was still interesting enough, just kind of being a character in the setting, which is, how I think we felt when we played the original core game. We could toss out the scaffolding that didn't work for the original rules, use Forged in the Dark mechanics and consequences, and that worked completely fine. It worked great.
Sherry, questions?
When you read those modules, do you feel that they give you like enough imaginative space to work in? Do you find that structure helpful? Because you were mentioning that they kind of build in more, but it's almost like you too have to take a train ride to get to it, you know?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it because I usually end up having a better grasp on the setting, but I usually have trouble remembering all of the things that they want me to remember because it's all mixed up in it, even though they try to section it off into different components and stuff. There's so much going on, like especially when they had the players can do everything now and the map is open, then I'm like, oh great, now I have to know what happens in 10 different locations and sprinkle in these mystery things. So it was difficult because even when I tried to translate it into doing notes, I still wasn't retaining the information very much. And I'm sure other people don't have that problem, probably have built that up as a skill or something from running modules forever.
In my experience, no, they don't.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was just tough to remember all of that stuff. And so it was just a lot more of a relief when I started just running it just like a forged game and kind of taking the broad things and putting it in, which is funny because I think a lot of people don't like that when you do the modules. So,
well, honestly, I agree with you. I've been running Trail of Cthulhu and running from the modules, and boy, that's so different. It's such a different approach to it, and in a mystery game especially, there's so many pieces that you're like, I don't want to get this wrong, because when I get it wrong later on, they're going to go, well, what? You said that was red. And I'm like, really? Okay. I hope that's not important, you know.
Yeah. I said magenta bread.
Well, the other thing is that we had explicitly had to come up with a signal for you've got everything you can get here. Because there's that thing of going, oh, you're a mystery game and you're in this box text land. And people are like, well, should we go and push on this panel? What about this one? Oh, look at the wine decanter. You know, it's hard to tell since it wasn't done by the GM. You can't even use your knowledge of the GM to figure out when you're done.
Let us say that there's a danger there of you knowing me and being able to read me like a book, like you did in that 13th Age game where I had a great secret and I was very excited to share it with the players. And it was going to be a great reveal. And Sherry goes, maybe it's X. I think it's X, like a session before I was going to do my big reveal. So,
just certain words you chose. That's all.
So, anything else you want to say about that, Fraser?
I'm glad that I bought the book, and I'm glad that it like expounds on the setting detail and stuff like that. But for me, it kind of just solidified that Coriolis is like living in this space that it just doesn't work and jive with me to what I'm trying to get from it, basically. But with the Forged in the Dark framework, maybe I can just take the setting and roll with it in my own way and discard the module, and then maybe that would be the perfect circumstance. Third time's the charm,
absolutely.
Right?
So it feels like it's worth continuing to try.
Just I wouldn't use a module for it. Yeah, I still like the setting enough that I'd be like, ooh, yeah, let's go check out an adventure where that I just, we just story game it up, where we just forge our own path in the Forged in the Dark.
Double Forge. So let me talk about my January. Off Gauntlet, did Urban Shadows, did Trail of Cthulhu, did 13th Age. We did that playtest of Working Stiffs. And then on Gauntlet, I did 2 different campaigns of Hearts of Wulin, though the Polar Vortex killed off the last session of one of those. And I did Masks, started my Gauntlet Quarterly for that. I did the Hilt Blade game, which I also agree with you too, is dynamite. Really excited to see where that goes. And then the other thing I did was, by request, we'd had someone ask, I think Stentor, asked if somebody could run Threadbare. So I had run it before, and so I did 2 sessions of that on the Gauntlet, and that's what I want to just briefly talk about. So Threadbare is another Powered by the Apocalypse game. It is Stitch Punk. It draws on things like the Islands of Misfit Toys, Toy Story. In particular, the movie 9 is a really good example, though that's much darker than this game is. But it also draws on this sort of Franken-toy craft movement, which is, if you look that up, it's kind of a craft thing that a lot of places do, where they get all kinds of toy pieces together and glue them and make up these weird toys that I didn't even realize that was a thing.
And if you look it up on Pinterest, it will fill your feed forever with scary, scary little toys.
So the premise is that you're playing sentient toys in a post-human world. The toys can move, they can talk, they can think, they can act. There's no explanation for why that is. And they're still following a toy logic, even though this is a world that is clearly a real world. There are no humans around, but there are ruins and things. And I think it's a very interesting premise. And there's a lot of stuff I like about this. One of the things is that they're just 3 playbooks. You can essentially be a mecha, which is a hard toy, like a transformer or action figure or something like that. Or you can be a sock, which means that you're one of several different kinds of sock puppets. Or it can be a softie, so you're like a plush animal or a doll or something of that sort. And then there are some, once you choose that playbook, you've got some roles, some further subdivision. But pretty much those playbooks, the move for your role type and the other move you choose, that's it. Your characters don't have any kind of advancement system. As you would expect, there's no XP. Instead, advancing and getting new moves and things is actually a jury rig move. You have to go and find stuff and then attach that and make up new moves for your characters based on what you do, which I think is a really interesting idea. It's a very cool book. It's got a lot of detail to it, and I have to admit this. So I had run it based on the starter set at Gen Con multiple times. So when I went to run it this time, I kind of fell back on that, and I didn't go to the book as much as I could have. And sort of afterwards, I realized just how many resources there were in the book. I had just kind of flipped through it. And afterwards, I was like, oh, I wish I had looked and had all these wonderful examples and details and ideas that it had given me. The book's got a lot of great stuff. One of the things that's really interesting for this game is the way it does its basic moves. You've got these 3 modes for the game. You can either do fluffy, which is pure sort of cartoony fun. Nobody fights. There's no real conflict. It's kind of a much lighter Care Bear story game, to do a callback. There's
no shame in that.
Yeah. There's scruffy, where you can get hurt, but you can't directly fight people. And then there's dented, where you actually have fighting and damage as a thing. And the default is sort of scruffy. And it's an interesting game because, like with some PBTA games, until you kind of get into it, you don't realize what moves aren't there and how much that changes what you do. Because there's no, like, do something or, kind of overcome something to achieve an object. There's none of that sort of generic move, which I know some people don't dig, but I find a useful fallback. So then as a GM, you have to ask yourself, so if they do want to do something, do I just say they do it, or do I have to find another move that fits with that? Which is, since I'm flipping through all these different PBTA games, I'm finding that a challenge is to figure out what's the playbook and what are the basic moves leaving out that I'm supposed to hand wave. Like, for example, Masks doesn't really have an investigate move. It has a go and talk to people and figure, and read them, but there's no investigate move, which for me is kind of a staple of superhero games. So that's kind of really changed how I approach that. And Masks also doesn't really have a do something move. So that's an interesting thing. I think Threadbare is a game that I find interesting for what it leaves out and for what it breaks down really granular. So we've got a whole bunch of different sort of social interaction moves in there. You can make friends. You can look fierce to intimidate someone. You can bribe someone. You can lead a cheer to cheer someone up. You can make a bargain, or you can play a game to get something. So we've got like 6 moves that are all very different shades of social interaction. So I think that the game really wants us to get into those trenches and figure that out. And the moves all do very, very different things. And I think for anyone who's interested in how PBTA plays, I think it's worth it to look at what Stephanie Bryant has done with those basic moves, how she's broken them down, how she's done the focus. Because I think that, how do I put this? I think that that's maybe a little bit too hidden. Like, I wish that the game was a little more upfront about saying, we've broken down the basic moves this way, and these are the reasons why we've done that. And, these are how these react, and these are the situations in which you use X versus Y. And that's just something that struck me that I'm trying to work through, because I think it's a really good game. It does mean that there's a lot of moves. There's a lot of basic moves. There's a two-page basic move sheet, but there's also a 3-page basic move sheet. And in play, the players found it hard to find the move that they wanted. Because here's the thing. In some games, you can say, I want to do this. And then we kind of, okay, we're going to figure out what that is and so on. But when there's a lot of moves like we have in this game, the players end up really looking at the basic move sheet and trying to figure out what is what, which can kind of get in their way.
Yeah, I find that with people who have played that game, that those types of games engineered that way, when they go back to other games that aren't, I don't like playing with them usually, because they look at the basic moves and then drive the fiction towards triggering them instead of the opposite, where they're just playing their character and doing it. Instead, they're just they're not saying that they're going aggro, but that's what they're doing, basically, right? Where they're just engineering circumstance to do things, which I think is useful when you're learning how to play a game, the basic mode of learning. But when you're kind of doing what PBTA wants you to be doing, which is just playing a character and then triggering the moves from the fiction, it introduces a sort of antagonistic metagame approach, especially when you're highlighting stuff, right? Because when it's highlighted, that's how I get XP, and then I'll just be raiding a person all day, or I'll be going aggro all day, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
and one of the things is at least in Threadbare, those moves all kind of have, it's not like it's the two different social moves are sort of the same move, but with a different framing on them. They're different things. They're very different things that can occur, and in some cases, very different currencies that are used, and so on. And I think that may be part of it, is that because they are so distinct from one another, that the players are trying to figure out what the rules are and what the rules give them permission to do.
Right.
And they get kind of caught up in that. I know that was one of the things we said in our discussion, in our debrief afterwards. I think I had a good time, and it was a super fun game because I had a whole bunch of props. And if you watch any of my videos for my recorded games, I recommend watching this because I had many, many toys that I put up in the camera, including some scary doll babies that I happen to have on hand. So I would recommend that. I don't think I did a great job of getting to the Franken-toy aspect. Players did some jury-rig moves, but we never really leaned into that to figure out, okay, now what do you look like? What kind of parts did you find? How does that change your character? And I think that's something that, in the long run, can be really interesting, but I don't think I managed to hit on that. So I kind of felt a little bad about that.
What if Storm Riders and Threadbare are in the same universe?
I think in some ways they would fit.
Yeah.
I mean, really, to be truthful, there's a lot of the same ideas, because there is that sort of toy sense to it and toy logic that, you could do Storm Riders with the toy version, with Misfit toys and that kind of thing, and it would work. But I actually do like a lot of the moves that are in that game, in Threadbare. I mean, it's a clever game. I like how Stephanie goes through and she says, if a player chooses this book, it means, this playbook, it means that they want to do these things. At least in theory, if they read it closely enough, it would mean they want to do those things. So, but I mean, she's pretty clear about what each playbook is kind of bringing in. So it has that sense of, you're putting these pieces or this group together, and those themes are going to be the ones that kind of wrap that group through.
Yeah, it's definitely one I want to go back to, because it is one of those PBTA games that, Pigsmoke, is a game covering a genre that there aren't like a whole lot of touchstones for. I mean, there are, but there's no big story, obvious sources for it for me. And that presents a challenge because I'm used to PBTA, people knowing the genre and the moves driving the fiction, and we play along with this. This requires a little more investment. There's some really interesting ideas in it, and I don't think I did as good a job as I could have, and I definitely want to go back to it again.
Well, there could even be another touchstone after people have played it. It might be Kingdom Hearts 3, right? With
that's
the world
right.
where you're in Toy Story.
That's a good point.
People might be able to grip onto that once that becomes a cultural touchstone.
Is that part of the game? Does it make sense?
Yeah, in Kingdom Hearts 3, you go into the Toy Story world, and you are like a toy. That's what you can affect. So it's sort of like, it changes the aesthetic and the rules and stuff. I haven't gotten to that world, but I've watched videos, and yeah, like you can't do all the things that you want to do, and you're like tiny, so everything's gigantic, and you can run up the walls and stuff like that for a sense of scale. But yeah.
Well, anyway, that's Threadbare. I think it's cool. I think it's worth checking out. There's a lot of neat stuff going on in that. Let's go to our guest segment, where we're going to talk about what our guest Fraser is working on, interested, or want to play.
Hi listeners, I want to tell you about the Gauntlet Patreon. The Gauntlet is one of the most active, vibrant communities in tabletop role-playing games. We produce podcasts, the Codex Zine, Gauntlet Hangouts, Gauntlet Con, and more. If you love small press, independent tabletop role-playing games, the Gauntlet is for you. And you can help keep things going by pledging to our Patreon. This year we have 4 different pledge levels for you to join at, each of which comes with a number of benefits. At the $2 level, you get early access to our actual play podcasts, including Pocket Size Play, as well as a special Keeper of the Gauntlet title. At the $5 level, you also get a PDF of our monthly zine, Codex. Your name and Keeper of the Gauntlet title is listed in the back of each issue of Codex while your pledge is active. At the $6 level, you also get access to the Gauntlet Slack group, which is the heart of our community. And at the $8 level, you get early RSVP access to new game events on Gauntlet Hangouts. The $8 spots are limited based off how many early access players we think the Gauntlet Hangouts calendar can support. Every month on the 15th, we will make a small number of new $8 spots available. So if you want to play games with the Gauntlet, make sure you keep an eye on our Patreon page around that time so you can grab one of those rare spots. Finally, every member of the Gauntlet Patreon, no matter the level they pledge at, gets to attend Gauntlet Con each year for free. Gauntlet Con is our incredible online gaming convention, with over 200 game events and panels, competitions and prizes, and our bumpin' Gauntlet Con Discord server. Folks, we can't do all this awesome stuff without you, so go check out our page and please consider pledging. We're at patreon.com/gauntlet. Thanks.
So, Fraser, what do you want to talk about today?
I'd like to talk about the Veil Inheritance, the third in the Veil line, which may capstone it, I'm not sure, but...
You're not calling it a trilogy yet?
No, because I think there might be space to have a book that is purposefully trying to tell the story of all 3 of them together, maybe with some advice on that. And then if I did that, then I could call it the Cyberpunk Quartet, so that would be cool. So, but the people who have been listening to me talk about this game forever know that it has always been the goal to make this modular design come to a 3-part series that is kind of like a inspiration from Cloud Atlas, where you would go from like one story to the next with characters that are translated or maintain the same thing into the next future aspect of the game. So Cascade had that, where you could awaken into like a new character, like a new sleeve or Altered Carbon type thing, except I called it Slack instead. Still British, I guess. This one, though, takes it into space, and I'm specifically making it to be like a Cowboy Bebop aesthetic to it, where it's everybody's like on a team. They're like bounty hunters. But the biopunk aspect of it is that everybody is actually designed beings. They're like a manufactured class that do these missions, and they're called imprints. And an imprint is manufactured, so instead of cybernetics, you have enhancements, and it's just something that each playbook has now. So instead of starting and being like, I want to have X cybernetics, it's just written there out for you. And you also have your imprinted with these memories that allow you to do these skills more effectively. So you're like the best of your kind or whatever. Like it gives you this skill set from the get-go that you can utilize, which is also the fictional positioning for bringing over your character from the Veil or Cascade or to this one. So it could be you bringing over moves from your previous character and being able to use them. And other aspects that are cool is that you could even have it so that you could end a cliffhanger on Cascade and then jump right into this, and you could use flashbacks to epilogue, what happened to your character
that's
previously.
A very clever idea.
Yeah, so you could figure out what that is without having to epilogue yourselves. And similarly, what might be the fourth book, I guess, is making a framework so that you could jump along this timeline, just like Cloud Atlas, and build up the Veil to a certain point, move to Cascade, build it up to a certain point again, go to Inheritance, and then once you get to the Inheritance, you could bounce around in this timeline, and similarly bring each one of those into a climax, and then resolve them just like you would in Cloud Atlas, essentially. So it has like a lot of interesting meta territory, I think, in it. And I think people will enjoy the fact that all of the playbooks are geared towards a singular purpose. That's usually what I get yelled at about the most. They're like, they're so disparate. I don't know how they would work together. Now you're a team. You're doing these things. And similarly to making the memories a hook for people to use for epilogues and other character stuff that they want to bring on, you can use them in Inheritance to make a hook for your adventure starter or whatever too, because you can insert whatever kind of memories that you would like to tie them together and make a mystery, which is kind of what's going to be the quick start. I have like curated questions towards a specific destination and a kind of like an open question that ties everybody together, that puts them on a set purpose with this, if they're on a ship or whatever they're doing out in space, they all want to accomplish the same thing if it's a one shot or something like that. So it also fixes something like that with where people were kind of having like an issue with the Veil running it as a one shot thing.
So I have to ask, in the Veil, you had these awesome like thematics for each of the playbooks. And when the group played, it meant it shaped that whole world by those themes for whatever was in the group. Are those themes, those questions, is that like pulling through to this level too? Or have you moved on to a different way of defining like what the character issues are, what the character theme is, I suppose?
Yeah, it's similar to Cascade, so it has you bring over those aspects and extrapolate them, but then it also introduces new ones about, like, specifically character stuff like biopunk, manufactured middle classes, and stuff like that. And also, it has a thing that it's essentially recontextualizing keys from Lady Blackbird or the Sprawls. Whatever the Sprawl had that was like keys. I can't remember what it was called, but you could select them. Directives, maybe?
Yeah, directives, I think.
Yeah, so it's like that where essentially you've been programmed to do this specific kind of playbook thing. So there's like a tracker, there's a hunter, or the tracker is the hunter. There's the killer, the tracker. There's 6 different playbooks with that, and each are thematically diverse, which inject aspects themselves. But then each of them have, I think, 6 or 7 different keys that are key to, like, the purpose of that playbook. So it informs the player kind of what this playbook is about. and then they get to choose one or two of those that get reinforced with XP as well. And some of them are like counterintuitively good, just like the Sprawl, where it's like, if you're a killer, then like, what is it about your framework on life that allows you to see people as like disposable, that kind of stuff. When you hit on that, then you get an XP. Or if that's too heavy for somebody, then they just choose a different directive that is geared towards something else. So there's a little bit more goal posting, I guess, on the playbooks, you could say, for hitting different themes like that. But I definitely want it to have a similar thing to Veil to Cascade to Inheritance, where these themes are going across time and being further extrapolated and hit on. And that way, when you do end up going back to the Veil or Cascade, if you end up using that eventual framework, there's those things that thematically tie it together throughout.
Now, you mentioned Cowboy Bebop as a touchstone, and it's a mature anime, and it's a more sophisticated anime, but it's still anime. Are you aiming for that aesthetic, or is Bebop more a touchstone in terms of plot?
Both. So, for one, I've hired a new artist, Simon Spurrier. I think that's how you pronounce the name. We've only contacted via email, so I haven't been like, please pronounce your name phonetically on this email. He is a Canadian artist who I actually found doing fan art for Friends at the Table, in the similar vein of like a Cowboy Bebop illustrated aesthetic that's a little bit like kind of darker, what I was going for there. And similar to Cowboy Bebop, all of the characters in Cowboy Bebop have these dark pasts that they refuse to deal with throughout it. And they meet people who are dealing with it, and they're kind of like stuck in their rut until, you know, their situations eventually get dealt with. But most of them are avoiding their past and not dealing with it. So I wanted to have a similar thing with these characters, in which they have like these imprinted memories, and it could either be, you know, something that you use to tie into an old character, but it could just be this unsettling sense that you had these things injected into you, and it's something that you have to come to grips with, right, and have to deal with, and it's something that is inherently compartmentalized by the character, but is a larger part of them no matter what they do about it.
So with the game, would you say it was about dealing with those dark past things, or is the plot more like mission based? I mean, is the design of the, I guess, approach mission based with that as the thematic?
Yeah, it would be mission based with that as the thematic. It's designed that you all be like a team of people with these different skills trying to accomplish a specific mission. And I wanted it to be sort of semi-episodic like Bebop, where you had these small stories that are mission type things, but are having like larger context when you need them. So that way it could be a one-shot or it could be a long-term campaign, but either way there was a lot of different hooks that you could grab onto and play.
So you've been playtesting this?
Yeah, actually I've been playtesting it for a long time, for like a...
Really?
Yeah, I actually have a recorded session of doing this on Gauntlet, actually, with where I went from the Veil to Cascade to Inheritance, actually. And that was like... It was probably a year ago now that I did that. And, oh yeah, another thing that I always forget, but that people will be super excited for, is there's mechs in this game. There's a playbook that is what I'm calling sheaths, and basically it's to abstract anything that is a mech or a ship. And basically your stats are generated by the size of it, but it also has moves that are sort of emblematic of anime things with mechs and ships, where you can kind of like get attached to the ship and you can be better at doing it. So you can invoke these different tropes just by taking the move that has to do with it. So if you have like a mech and you want it to be like something that you can, whatchamacallit, like new type Gundam with or whatever, then you could take that move and work towards it, and you can modify the different stats for it and stuff like that.
Very cool. So what have you seen in terms of playtesting? What are you kind of looking at right now with that?
Yeah, what I'm bucking up against is I want to codify what the keys are in a way that isn't problematic. Because right now they're called genetic compulsions because that's what you're built with.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. So I had to codify the language in such a way that it's hitting on the themes that I want, but that it's a consent-based approach for the player-facing materials.
So in a sense, what we've got going on is people are genetically crafted so that they have certain physical strengths and abilities and things like that, but then they're also mimetically conditioned to have, instincts and things like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So,
and then they've got their selves. So there's what you're playing at is the tension between those three things.
Yeah, exactly. So I want that to be the like meta thing about it, but then have all of those aspects player facing so that the players aren't in a place where they're like uncomfortable with wherever this character is going. They can choose the different things, and those are all XP driven stuff that they get for hitting on it. And then also, just kind of like opt in to the things rather than it being a default to the setting that could be a problematic thing. So, it'll be a tricky thing to do, which I think I'll have to put in front of a few people's faces before it's codified. But otherwise, it has been doing what I wanted. I've ran a one-shot of the quick start, which I'm going to be working on now, and it was really fun. I made it so that all of these people had memories inserted by someone who was kind of like a rebel before they were even born, and they were all drawn to this person, and that was the open-ended question. It was just getting them to there, but each of the memories were just sort of like snapshots of events happening with this person that kind of signaled to me what the players wanted to see about the scenario. And it was on it's on an abandoned, but a asteroid colony that's kind of like off the beaten path and used as sort of like a waypoint for these people doing criminal activities and stuff like that. And they're all sort of mysteriously drawn to this location. And then we just kind of roll with it from there. And it ended up being really satisfying and neat. And it was exactly as I had planned, in that the ending was something that would start a campaign, not just like you could use it to just tie it off as a one shot, but it was more like, okay, we found this person and now there's even more questions, which is good because the main XP system is questions that get answered in different ways. So if you tie a question to your previous character for the epilogue part that I was talking about, you also get XP for answering that in a flashback as you're going. And so, it's all very cyclical. I just have to, iron out the kinks, essentially.
Sherry, you have any other questions for Fraser?
No, I'm just super excited to see this because the Veil is my jam. So when you need to play test it to see how a boring person reacts to it, just know who to call.
We've played the Veil a lot, and I think it's a game that's shaped our thinking. It's helped us get into PBTA in the last 2 years, and so I'm very excited to see more of this from you. Cool.
Yeah, thanks. I think it'll be similarly really interesting to have this all coalesce, because it's a modular design that I've been playing at and working towards for like 5 years now. Like originally the Veil was going to be this, like it was going to be all of this stuff in one thing, and Kyle was like, nah, Bill.
I think Kyle has good instincts.
Yeah, because I mean, even just the Veil has high cognitive load. So if it was like all of this, it would have been, well, and plus how many pages would that have been? So I think this is a much better approach. People can take whichever game that they want, play it in whatever order they like, or similarly do a campaign from game to game to game and get some mechanical reinforcement and some fiction along with it that makes it pretty unique. I was really excited, but also kind of scared because like it was 5 years ago. So I was like, I hope nobody else has this idea. It won't be as novel.
Awesome. Well, let's go to Giving Me Life. It's Giving Me Life. Sherry, what is giving you life?
Oh, let's see here. Well, I have to admit, about 3 months ago, I picked up this stupid phone game. It's Love, Nikki, Dress Up. It's a paper doweling game. Essentially, you collect outfits, and then you dress her. And then you compete with your fellow players for the best outfit for a given theme. This suits me to such an extent I cannot even express it. For some reason, I had no idea that I was a competitive dresser. It is awesome. But the best part about it, and it took me a while to realize it, is that the whole thing has this weird framework of this incredibly ridiculous, fantastic story of a sort of Alice in Wonderland, like a normal girl falls into this fantasy land where all of the countries have different fashion styles. And instead of fighting wars with weapons, they have fashion competitions to decide everything. And there's like all these complicated like love relationships and, you know, alliances, and these crazy characters keep popping up, and the translation is horrible because it's made by a Chinese company. So you kind of like have to read it a few times to try to get the sense of what's going on. But it's magnificent and crazy, and it's like the Wu Lin of paper dolls.
Awesome.
It is amazing. So I've been enjoying that extensively for the last 3 months.
Are you ruthless in it?
I am.
Tell me truthfully.
Well, actually, I mutter curses to all the people that when they do their competitions, all they do is put on one of the standard sets instead of like, you know, putting a real ensemble together, showing any originality. Oh, it burns me. So,
I'll hear her go, oh, really? As she's doing that. Fraser, what is giving you life?
Something, I think, far nerdier than that.
What could be?
Mine is doing the roll tables for Hack the Planet. So I sent the main text out for editing, and the last things that I had to do was I had to decide if I wanted to do roll tables for Blades in the Dark, which Hack the Planet is a Forged in the Dark game, so it's like using the same structure and formatting of the SRD and the other games. So I had to decide on that, and at first I was like, roll tables. It's like, I don't know if I want to do that. But so many people said that they found them so useful for Blades in the Dark, so I was like, okay, well, I'll try that out. And now I'm like, I'm in it.
I love that stuff.
Like, yeah, I had an idea where I thought I could use a roll table to actually kind of communicate cyberpunk themes as well. So I have one where it's just a 6 sided die roll for different themes. So like loss of agency, empowerment, a new frontier or a micro world, stratification of class or something. But then it's paired with the color palette as well that you'll be using in the game. So anytime that you're hitting on empowerment as a theme and you rolled, let's say 5, it would be like ultraviolet lighting, right? And then to go with that, there's also an association, which is like a literary thing, which might be going too far for everybody else. But I have those as like religion or faith or mechanical systems or pop culture and stuff like that. So when you're describing this thing, you've got a color, and then you have like a terminology set essentially for contrasting them, which is very like Neuromancer. In Neuromancer, he's always comparing human beings to mechanical subsystems and stuff like that. And vice versa, cybernetic systems are always referred to as natural things like plant life and photosynthesis and weird stuff like that.
That is awesome. I love that kind of generation of ideas to run from. That's great. For me, what's given me life is I love foreign police procedurals, particularly cozy ones. and especially British kind of police procedurals. And there's a series called Vera, which is on Amazon Prime. It's split across a couple of different services, but I've been sort of binging that for the last week, and I love it. She's an older, sort of frumpy Northern England police detective, and the mysteries are solid, and they're fair, and they keep clipping along, and they're not too gritty, and they're not too light. They're just hitting my comfort zone, and I think I've probably watched 12.5, hour and a half long mysteries over the last week from this series. I love it, and it's certainly what's giving me life.
Have you guys seen Killing Eve?
I have
before?
started to watch that.
What do you think of that? Is that in your comfort zone?
It is a different structure than I like, and it's a little more thriller, a little more sophisticated, I think. I like a pretty kind of closed narrative. This is our mystery this week. That Killing Eve's great, but it is wildly open.
Yeah, there's things that happen in that show
okay.
later on.
that was ominous. Well, listeners, that's our show. If you want to get in touch with us, we're on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. We also have a website you can check out at gauntlet-rpg.com. And if you're interested in supporting us or our zine, our community, these various podcasts that we have, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. Thank you, Sherry.
Sure.
And thank you, Fraser.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. That's our show.